Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Catharine Bomhold. I am the creator, author, editor of the ALA Editions Neal Schuman book, Serving the Underserved: Strategies for Inclusive Community Engagement, due out in December. I am also an associate professor in the School of Library and Information Science at the University of Southern Mississippi. And I've been here for 21 years as an instructor, part of which is teaching a class on serving the underserved. So welcome. I want to welcome everyone to the second meeting of Edi and Neal's book club, the ALA Editions Neal Schuman book club. Today we're exploring questions raised by ALA author Lesley Farmer, who's here, of course, and she and I will, her book, Impactful Community-Based Literacy Projects. Lesley and I will chat a bit about her book first, before we open the discussion to our panel, all of whom are ALA Editions authors. And then to you, our audience, who we want to thank for joining us today. So thank you again for being here. Lesley, welcome. And tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to prioritize community and literacy in your practical and theoretical work. Many of us know you from your school libraries work, and this seems moderately connected, but still different.
Right, exactly. So yeah, so I've been coordinating the teacher librarian program at California State University, Long Beach for 25 years. But over the years, I've been a youth serving librarian in both public and school libraries, as well as an English teacher and also, academic educator. So I've always loved language, the world of words. And so especially because, my heart is with, young people, and, libraries are sort of like, the spot, for, resources. And so getting students not only, physical access, but also intellectual access, to information.
Right.
I'm also really interested in media literacy, which I consider part of information literacy. So when you're talking about, literacies, you're really talking about the, ability, to consume and, produce, the language, in words, whether it's orthographic, writing, speaking, listening. And so that's just kind of been a strand throughout my life. So the same thing in terms of research, it kind of fits there too.
Okay.
In terms of how that connects with book, that was inspired by the Library of Congress, and as a little backstory, I've also been associated for years with the International Association of School Librarianship, and I was on the IFLA literacy and reading section and ALA's literacy assembly. So that's kind of where more of that focus was. So book was really inspired by those, professional, associations. I was one of the founding members of the Library of Congress Literacy Awards. So, as a writer, presenter in the field, I really wanted to share that information. And so that's the reason, for the book.
Fascinating. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Why do you think it's important for public librarians in particular, but all librarians really, to work on community-based literacy projects?
Right. So the obvious thing is what is our, one of our main purposes is connecting, information ideas with people and their information needs, as well as entertainment, leisure, needs. So, curating those collections needs to be community-based. So we need to know our community. And, if we just kind of sit and wait for someone to come in, that's not really going to work. So that active partnership is, so important. So I would say that it's sort of tricky to to avoid participating in literacy projects, quite frankly.
Yeah, interesting. In my class, I tell them at the beginning of class that we're not talking about things that go on in the library, but what we should be doing outside those brick walls. And even my graduate students takes a few minutes for them to kind of get their mind wrapped around that idea that we have to go out instead of that waiting for people to come in, which is an excellent point. What do you think makes a community-based literacy project actually work? What's the key?
What's the secret sauce?
Yeah, the keystone. Yeah.
Right. Well, again, if librarians are participating, in that, number one, they need to know their community, what their needs are, what motivates them, and they need to build those trusting relationships. So it's got to be two-way. We're not the saviors kind of a thing, but it's like, again, one of our panelists talks about the importance of collaboration, which was actually one of my first books. And so it's like, what's the mutual goal, and what does each stakeholder bring to the table? So in terms of, material and, human, resources. So that's the deal, is that, again, these literacy projects need to come from the needs of the folks. Doing it top down isn't going to work. So, folks really have to have, a passion for that, and seeing, how can we improve our community, and how can we improve the people within it? So again, leveraging, those things. And then again, clear expectations, regular and consistent communication. Being systematic is so important. Being able to really plan it, being really intentional and clear. And again, starting with those really key influencers who are reputable and dependable and all this kind of good thing, and then kind of building out, the network, doing constant monitoring, evaluating what's working, what isn't, making those shifts, as needed, and building on existing structures. So it doesn't have to be brand new, but you're, extending, enhancing what's already being done. Really needs to be asset based. So again, it's like, oh, these poor people, they don't It's like, again, you need, the learner, you need, the trainers, and you need the resources in order, to do that. And again, good benchmarking, look at the evidence, look at what has been successful in other, folks, making sure, everybody, is benefiting, that there's, systems of choice, that there's, inclusion, all of the good things for almost any kind of, program.
Yeah. Well, and one of the words that I guess phrases that I used in graduate school, those many years ago, that I learned, that I've since found out other faculty have never heard, but it's cognitive authorities. It's not going in and saying, I know these things, therefore you should believe me, but getting that one person in the community who other people in the community are going to believe.
Exactly.
And then the other part is making sure that the deliverables are something they actually need.
Right. And so I think that's,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, is that you're not saying, oh, you're going to learn how to read and write. It's basically, we're going to give you some tools so that you can get a job. We're going to get, some tools so that you'll be able to have, a steady income. You're going to do so that you're going to be able to be the number one expert in stamp collecting.
Right. Exactly. I have an interesting example from my class where they were doing community service work, where one of my students went in at the invitation of the woman who ran the food pantry and translated all their materials into Spanish. And I went back and talked to her, and she said, well, the student did a great job. It was what I asked them to do and everything. And she said, and they still weren't using it until we found out that most of our are people who are using the pantry can't read.
Mhm.
And so it was that we think this is what would be helpful, but we need to talk to the people, the users, and really find out what they're doing first. So Lesley, since you published impactful community-based literacy projects in 2020, what are some of the highlights of your recent research and public initiatives, particularly in the face of post-COVID-ness,
Right.
or post-COVID society?
Yeah, right. So probably the most obvious one is a grant from IMLS. And so I served as literacy consultant for Reading Nation Waterfall, which has been community-based early literacy, program for 6 tribes within the United States geographically. And so the real core of that is the collaboration within each tribe as to where resources can be located, and how can families in particular, promote, help kids in terms of reading. And COVID really impacted, that program because, it was hard for those folks to collaborate, physically. And golly sakes, disease seemed to be a higher priority right then instead of early literacy.
Yeah.
So, and also trying to, since it was, 6 tribes kind of doing that, the mega community of, connecting, between, but first you have to get your own community, well connected. So, that's been a real reality check in terms of what makes things effective. I've also been doing research, again, I told you I'm kind of into media literacy, which really does require literacy. And so I'm now on the board of the California Student Media Festival. And so I did research over the last 15 years of winning student videos for this festival, for this competition, and looked at, issues of media literacy, information literacy. So that was really interesting. And because of that, then we are providing more resources, for students online in terms of being able to create, effective, compelling videos. And most of that work, because it's kind of done through the schools, it really has to do with informing, folks in lots of, different ways, that again reflect, students' own interests and gives them the authority, to share their expertise and insights. And then I also have been involved in the whole thing about fake news, disinformation. And so one of my books is on fake news in context, put out by Rutledge. So yeah, I've kept busy.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I want to kind of pull in everybody else who's been sitting here. Want to at first have you guys introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit, what you've done, why you're here, and what you do. And then we'll go for some questions there. Elizabeth McChesney, want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth McChesney. I also go by Liz, but today I'm Elizabeth. I serve as the Early Childhood Literacy and Community Partnerships Director for the Laundry Cares Foundation, which I will tell you a little bit more about. And I work at the National Summer Learning Association as a senior fellow, and I consult to the Urban Libraries Council. Before that, I spent 31 years as a public library administrator, librarian and administrator in Chicago. I was the head of children's services and family engagement for Chicago's 81 branches, and have a deep and abiding love for all things outreach and really finding connections to communities, centering community voice, and leading early literacy for to drive equity in communities. I have a couple books with ALA editions. The first one came from a reimagined summer program in Chicago. It's called Summer Matters, Making All Learning Count, in which we put summer reading on its side and included STEM learning and art and maker activities and increased our participation by 50% and kind of snuck the reading in for kids who maybe didn't find their way to the library. The second book comes from that. It's called Pairing STEAM with Stories, and it's how to connect STEM and STEAM activities to children's literature. And I have a forthcoming book called Wonder Libraries, 20 expert perspectives on what kids need now, that really leverages research from outside of libraries for best practices that we can extrapolate for the public libraries. And I think that's it, right, Catherine?
Yeah, I think so. That's a lot. All right, Belinha. This is Dr. Belinha Abreu. And she is the author of Media Literacy for Justice, Lessons for the Changing World.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I also have another book with Neal Schuman, which is Teaching Media Literacy, that I actually wrote in 2006 and then had the opportunity to do a second edition in 2019, which was, I think, perfect timing after all the things that were happening around the world. Thank you for having me. I am the president of the International Council for Media Literacy. I also run the International Media Literacy Research Symposium, which Lesley was at this summer. We actually held it in the Azores with 160 people from around the world, which came to the island, which was lovely. I've been doing this work for 29 years. I've been in public education and in higher ed, so I actually bridge both areas because frankly, I really believe that so much research is written about into schools without actually understanding what's actually happening in schools. And so the work, I think, of public education very much suffers from that. And I think more practitioners need to have more voice in the research process piece. And so I've also done work, stayed in the public education sphere in order to, I guess, reclaim it a bit, but also to make sure that when I'm speaking about it, I'm speaking from experience and the truth of what's happening in those spaces as well. I've been, I guess, writing and speaking about these issues internationally now for quite some time. I spent this summer after the Azores in Finland actually looking at their work in media literacy education. Fundamentally, I think obviously media literacy education is one of the most important literacies that we can have for today's world. And yes, it's a literacy. Some people always say that to me, well, is it a literacy? And I'm like, absolutely it is. Very much like reading and writing, it's about understanding how we process and look at information and how it informs us and how we inform it, because it is not a one-way street any longer. And so a lot of my work has really been about teaching people how to think about that. Most recently, actually, I've been asked by companies now to come in and talk to their employees about the value of understanding the media because it's affecting the way in which people are talking or not talking to each other. I worked this past year with a cohort of college students specifically directed at civic discourse and the polarization issues in the country. And it's clearly something that we know it exists. We're in the middle of an election cycle. How can we miss it? But there's a lot going on. And beyond that, though, I think one of the things that I've thought about often is that the discourse issue came before all of this. It's just that this was enhanced in a very different way. And when you have these loud media voices adding to the volume, it really blurs the lines of what people understand to be truth today. And so that's a lot of what my work has been of late. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right, Kat, your turn.
I'm Kat Breitenbach. I'm a teen librarian in suburban New Jersey. I've been here for just about 15 years. And before that, I was a children's and teen librarian in North Chicago, not part of Chicago, sorry, but the city of North Chicago.
Okay.
There's a difference. Everybody confuses it. It's okay. And I wrote the second edition of LGBTQIA plus books for children and teens with Liz Deskins.
Who's also here. Yeah.
Yes.
Liz?
Well, thank you. I'm the other Liz.
Yeah.
And yes, I had a great time writing book with Kathleen. She's very knowledgeable and we had great fun. It goes to show the powers of collaboration, large and small. I think that's always something we need to look at. But I'm a retired educator. I was a school librarian for 33 years in elementaries and then in high school. I also adjunct for Kent State University in their graduate library school, which is great fun. I love staying current and bringing all that joy to everybody. I've written the first and second editions of the LGBTQ book, first with Dr. Christina Dorr, and then with my good friend Kat. And I wrote a book through AASL editions about collaboration for secondary educators, which those of you who've been in education know it's not as easy as elementary. I do a lot of work within my local organization. I spent time in the public library. I went over one time and worked the summer reading program, because my all the special IEP meetings were done in the library, and I would overhear. And anybody who was behind on reading, they would always say, go sign up for the summer reading program. And I would think, are they really getting anything from that? So I went over and said, can I work? And I realized that they were checking out books. They were bringing them right back. They, they were, and I did some educating at the school level about what you can do, but these are such powerful conversations and books you all have. As soon as we're done, I'm pulling out my credit card and having a nice time in the ALA bookstore, or not nice, depending on how my credit card feels about it. So I'm just happy to be here with all of you.
Yeah, and what I hear all of you saying is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. And I just wish my graduate students would hear this, because they hate their group projects.
Oh, yes.
And they're hard, they really are, but I just can't stress enough to them that, you don't operate in a vacuum. Everything you do, you're going to work with other people. And so you just need to get used to it now. And I'm so glad to hear that. And each one of you have said something about, working with collaboration. I guess the big question here is, what connections do you see with Dr. Farmer's book? I think a lot of us can intuit it, but these priorities for your libraries and what you're doing. And I like what you were saying, Liz, about, well, and all of you have talked about literacy, and not just early literacy, but literacy is as the, I don't know, maybe the big L, in that it's not just learning to read, right? Which of course is important, because you can't do anything else. There's, interestingly, the American Association of Academy of Pediatrics actually has, I don't know if you call it a white paper or whatever, that states that, if a child can't read early, that affects their health outcomes later in life. And that's just stunning, but makes perfect sense. If you can't navigate.
So if I can add to that, was one of the Library of Congress's winning literacy projects, was Reach Out and Read.
Right.
Just started in Boston, and now there are over 6,000 sites and 7 million books that are distributed each year. And again, started out as a community-based thing of exactly, what was the need, and then the pediatricians working with parents, giving their families a free book every 6 months as part of the Well Child piece. And really impactful. If you want to talk about impactful, community-based.
I'm sorry. I get all excited. These are all the things I love to talk about, but especially living in a high poverty area where, yes, there are those who are like myself, frequent the library, but such a huge population of Mississippi, doesn't access the library because there are more important things than going to the library, like working 2 jobs, childcare, getting to the library, even if it's within their realm of things to do, or buying books is so far down on the list that giving away is so important. So all of you, I want to talk about, the good things, the things that you get excited about. What are some of your favorite community-based literacy projects that you've worked on? I know very briefly, I don't mean to monopolize, I just like talking to other people, but I did Read Across America Day for half a dozen years before the pandemic sank it. But what I was able to do was give kids not just a book, but once they got through with a variety of activities, they would walk home with 12 books or 15 books. And you just see these kids, dragging their bag away, but getting all excited about it, because it was something to own. So what are the kinds of things that excite you in what you do? And what are some of the projects that you found that are really, got good reviews and got you all jazzed up? Liz?
Well, mine are such smaller scales, but I listen to things all around Ohio when I go to conferences. I just think the idea that, from my point, with that, always including parents and what they need and want. You made me think very early in my career. I had a large Hispanic population, so I was so proud of myself. I went everywhere. I found this. I had this great little collection of books written in Spanish, and I really couldn't get the kids to check them out, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And finally, when parent-teacher conferences came along, and I was talking to some of the teachers, they talked about needing interpreters because the parents didn't speak English, and it was coming up that they were, a lot of them, functionally illiterate. And like, duh.
Yeah.
It really made me realize. So we started doing pulling together some great programs in the school where we did things that brought the parents in, and parents who, so many parents like that are not comfortable coming into the education setting because that's not their place or their culture, because we had several cultures that you gave your children over to the educators and you step back. That was their role and they had their own role. So we always did things that included food first. You always have to include food, like a meal. We would get meals sponsored. We would get babysitters in so we could have things with the parents.
Right.
Sometimes we provided transportation because so many of these literacy events, the big curtailing thing is getting there.
Right.
That's huge. When computers started being a thing, all the teachers in high school were gung-ho of giving all these assignments using the internet. And we kept trying to explain, well, we had two giant apartment complexes where the students lived, not within walking distance of the library. And in the case of two parents working or, 8 million people in the home, they couldn't get to the public library to get this work done. So I just stayed open. I opened early for the kids who could get there. I stayed after so they got work done because you had to meet them where they were.
Yeah.
And eventually we did get some homework help groups into these apartment complexes. Now all of the libraries in the Columbus Public Schools have homework help desks that are open every day after school, and they do all kinds of excellent activities. But once again, it's, even though there are a million, Columbus has hundreds and hundreds of branches, maybe not that many, not like some of bigger cities, but it's still a case of whether you can get to it or not. So I feel like it's so important that we find those locations where they are.
Exactly.
Can
And
I chime?
Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Can I chime in here just to talk about laundry cares a little bit, because you're
I
talking
want
my
to.
love language, Liz.
Yes.
So Laundry
I've read about
Cares
these.
is a partnership between the Clinton Foundation's Early Childhood Arm, Too Small to Fail, and the Coin Laundry Association. Because who knew there's an association for everyone? There is a Coin Laundry Association.
Okay.
And their premise was the laundromat owners wanted to change the way people act and think about laundromats and act in laundromats. And the Clinton Foundation had been charged with finding ways to bring early learning to communities who are experiencing high poverty. And that's where I came in. Just as I was retiring from the Chicago Public Library, I took on the role of building out early literacy in these laundromats. We now have about 350 sites across the country. And it really centers on this very thing, breaking down the barriers, meeting families where they are. And I love the way Dr. Farmer talks about that. And it talks about community voice, because we go in, I get to travel all over, and we go in and we ask people what's important to them. And I would say about 95% of the time, what I hear is, I want my child to be able to read so they can be successful in school and life, or words to that effect. And so we bring in really high interest reading materials, maybe the stuff I was a little too snobby to sometimes include in the public library. But then we also bring those really solid fundamental books that promote phonological awareness and the predictive variables of literacy development that Dr. Farmer also discusses. But, people have a repeat visit cycle to a laundromat, and they have a wait time. And we find that if we can catch parents in that wash cycle time, they'll come and sit with their kids for 25, 30 minutes while the wash is spinning. They won't leave the dryers, but they will leave the wash cycle. So what we try to do is really introduce neighborhood librarians, community libraries right into those spaces. We'll come in and we'll do a takeover of the laundromat, and we'll bring the community librarian along so that people get used to seeing them, and they can make that introduction right there and then hopefully it's a happy partnership afterwards. The whole conversation about data comes in there, because I have had librarians say to me, I can go to Head Start and get 30 kids in my statistics. In the laundromat, I may only see 6 kids. Yeah, but you're seeing 6 kids who don't have access to books, who are taking books home for the very first time, who are jazzed about it and who want to know you and don't have any other access to it. So we're seeing the kids that are the most disenfranchised from public libraries and people who sort of live in the shadows of our current society. And the space transformation is really important. Those free laundry days are huge for us, but the giving books away, to me, it's like what you were saying, Liz. I mean, we routinely send 10, 15 books home with kids, because we know building a home library is so important for building a reader and a family of readers.
I loved the first time I read about that program. I just think that how smart is that? A very well, maybe stressful. I hate to do laundry, but and someplace they have to go. And it's not always a fun time, especially if you, of course, have to bring your children. So you're pulling in all those feels that are going to make it a much more positive experience to think about books
and it brings dignity, which I think is really important to the conversation about literacy, is respecting people, hearing their needs, and then answering them. And I just love the way Dr. Farmer talks about that in the book. And it picks up on something in my new book, Wonder Libraries. Susan Newman has a chapter on trusted messengers, and she talks about research in laundromats and how critical it is, not that I show up with my Nordic skin and features, but that someone from the neighborhood who works there, an attendant who's typically a mom or a dad, can say, look what we just put in here, and it's all for you. The blocks help build math skills, the books you can take home. And that trusted messenger piece is just so critical, and it can't always be us. We're just part of the ecosystem.
And I want to just insert, when you're talking about laundromat. So one really interesting project is called Reading at the Well. This is in Southern Sudan. And basically, the idea is like, where do people congregate? And especially where they have to be there for a while. And so as local teachers then, who would basically teach reading to these women who are washing their clothes at the well, and they'd usually have to wait, in line, etc. And then they would provide them with backpacks and materials, and then they would share them with their families and their neighborhoods, and it became a train the trainer thing. So
breaking down barriers.
Exactly.
Love it.
Kat, Belinha, either one of you want to chime in here? What are the projects that have really got your juices flowing, or that you've seen some real experience, some positive aspects or outcomes that you want to share.
I'm curious about, because media literacy is huge, and disinformation, for the next 3 weeks is going to be critical. But I'm just wondering how media literacy and illiteracy are connected, because once you learn where the buttons are, you can kind of manipulate your computer, even if you aren't very literate, and you can see and hear things.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Actually,
how do you see that work?
So literacy and illiteracy is what you're saying.
Yes.
So I think it's interesting because, honestly, I always find that the media literacy perspective is very individualized by the interest level, right? And what I mean by that is that you don't actually have to read well to end up being in the media, which is problematic, right?
Yeah.
And that also means that you don't have to process information well to be in the media. In fact, some people who will say, oh, well, this person is being very media illiterate because of the things that they're saying, when it's really not about them being media illiterate as much as that they've been able to propagandize the media. And so there's lots of pieces of media that has sort of taken on, I think, a different lens just because of that. This summer, one of the gentlemen that was at the conference said to me, well, media literate, if you're media literate, you can't be racist. And I said, I completely disagree. You absolutely can be media literate and racist. And he was I think it threw his mind because he lives in the empathy space of media literacy, which is a beautiful, wonderful space, but that's the assumption that everyone's gotten to be empathetic. And we know that's not true. And not only that, empathy grows with you based on experience. It's not this sort of, it just doesn't happen. It's actually one of the reasons why I have a huge issue when schools are trying to teach empathy without providing experiences of that, because it's like you're going to tell them, okay, great, but what have they learned from it, right? And defining it isn't enough. And I think so that's sort of, I think, another like level of it that gets sort of lost, because everyone's like, well, if you know how to look at media, you ask questions about the media, then that makes you media literate. And I actually find that to be just as problematic, because I think the fake news disinformation space has added more problems to media literacy than making it a better space. The check systems that are out there, as lovely as they are because of their simplicity, don't take you to the depths of knowledge that needs to be there. Claire Wardle, who was at Harvard, I think she's at Brown right now, she wrote this really interesting article about misinformation that contested some of the work that she had been doing that introduced disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation, because she realized it was so surface level that it was this, once again, simplistic look at, oh, well, if you know what it is, then you understand it, it won't be repeated again. And we know that's not true.
No, not at all.
And you also need to know that, your media literacy is about your wanting to learn more and to be a participant in this way. Just because it's taught to you doesn't mean that you've taken it in either.
Right.
And I think, this is something that we all in education have to deal with anyway, because, just like reading and writing, just because you know how to read and write doesn't mean you actually understand what you read or wrote. And so, people forget that there's these leveling of things that are happening. I do want to mention just one other thing, because of the community aspect that Lesley mentions in her book. And I feel like I've been doing a lot more community work of late. And one of the things that it has made me consider is that sometimes we narrow the lens on community, and we might need to throw a wider lens. For example, I was at a cultural event this weekend, and they were hosting a health forum, and they asked me to sit on a panel to talk about media literacy in relation to health. And I found myself sitting in the audience and listening to the people who were sitting there who had lots of cultural questions that were related to the media that we often don't perceive, or we give a sweeping perception just because someone is whatever they are in appearance or whatever it may be, that must be true across the board.
Mhm.
And I think we've done a disservice to people in that way, because we forget that people come into spaces with their own trauma, with their own experiences, both positive and negative. And so what people take out of an experience looks very different than I think sometimes we go into a space believing in. And I'll stop at that.
Yeah, thank you. I just, we do need to move on, but Kat, what about you? You haven't got a chance to chime in.
Very
So
well
my library does a lot of work with like new immigrants and English language learners. So we've been partnering for years, like even before my time, with an organization called Literacy New Jersey. And they have, local, county organizations. And they come in, they do classes, they do one-on-one tutoring. And we've been connecting people with them for years and years and years, and helping supplement their what they're able to provide, collections, getting materials for them to help teach, because again, like for the parents that are coming in, if they don't know how to read or write in English, it makes things so much harder, not just for them and for their prospects, but for their children as well. And it also just brings them into the library, gets new people into the library, and shows what resources we can provide,
Right.
and not just for the little kids in story time.
Right.
We're for the whole lifespan.
Yeah. Great.
Which can sometimes get forgotten.
Yeah.
I say as a teen librarian.
Yeah. Well, and let me go back. Let me ask another question, but I'll start with you, Kat. What are the hardest part, I think, is that community building, right? Partnership building, getting people to understand that we're not just librarians, right? We're information professionals, and this is part and parcel of what we do. So what kind of tips, and I'll ask all of you, but let me start with Kat, what kind of tips do you have for doing that partnership building?
So a lot of librarians obviously will partner with schools.
Right.
That's kind of basic. I partner with local businesses as well. There's a local game store in town, and we partner with and cross promote because they run Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh yeah.
How much reading do you have to do to play
That's
Dungeons
right.
and Dragons? How much math do you have to do to play Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah.
Like, being able to find the different connections, and it can be difficult sometimes, but it's really rewarding and it's necessary.
Right.
And it expands our reach and expands what everybody else is able to do as well. And sometimes you just get to have fun.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. And so we're looking at thinking outside of two boxes. And so the first box is the library, think outside those brick walls, but then also think outside the book box as to we're about books, we're not. And so how can we manage that? How can we think creatively about matching with what we do? Belinda, Belinha, you got anything to answer this or respond? Nope. I think we've lost her. I know she was having problems earlier. Liz, what about you?
Before was such an age of controversy, I did some good connections with local churches because that's another place to connect, and people will go to church even if they aren't that literate, and you can get some of those parent groupings and create situations for parents to get taught and learn, have some information. So that was a localized thing that was very successful for me in small groups, but sometimes I think small groups make for larger groups. And I have to say, I think that the biggest takeaway I got from Lesley's book is a reminder that you're careful explaining of the action research. Because I think for any of these things to succeed, you really need to go through those steps. Early in my career, young and excited and experienced, I just jumped into a big idea and, chips fell where they fell. And, and so I think having, smart enough to put those steps into place and the people in place that are going to make this work is your opportunity for success. Because sometimes like I've heard all these things get me all excited and I'm thinking, okay, I'm retired. What can I go do? How can I bring literacy to the masses? Well, you need to find a group to work with, because you just can't go out with your little super library cape and think it's going to work.
I think we're all guilty of that every once in a while. But so Elizabeth McChesney, so much of what you do, I mean, is going out and trying to convince people, I mean, who have no idea what you're talking about, what you want to do, to get on board. Do you have any suggestions, or how can we improve that? What through your experience and expertise?
Ooh, that's a hard question.
I think 30 seconds or less.
I think really humble listening and figuring out what it is that your partner is motivated by. When we partnered with the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, they wanted to get outside the museum doors and into communities. At Laundry Cares, it's business owners who want to increase moms who come to laundromats because they're really good customers and they bring a lot of dirty clothes and that's money for them. So, it's finding how to speak to someone in their currency. And that partnership piece is so important. Dr. Farmer was talking about reach out and read. Mariana Glusman, who's a pediatrician in Chicago at Lurie Children's Hospital, is the Illinois president of Reach Out and Read. She has a chapter in this book, Wonder Libraries, too. And she wanted to call it It's All About Relationships, Stupid. But we had to rename it. But she said it's all about, everything in all of our work is about relationships. Reading is about relationships, too. And so what Dr. Glusman says in her chapter is finding the partner who's willing to listen to you is an art, and it's not something that everybody gets to do the first go around. It can take several tries and several different people to find the right fit.
Great, thank you. Well, we are kind of running short on time, but I do want to take some questions from the audience. And what I am seeing is some people are talking about being in rural libraries. And that is a whole another animal. And any of you have experience working in rural libraries, and what can you do or say to address that, where resources are low, staffing is low, sometimes staffing is not, well educated in library science. What can we do?
I'm going to point out there is a center at Clarion University that specifically looks at research and programs for rural libraries. So that's just a good spot. I think technically, literally, the idea of the internet really can help. But at the same time, there's still that, the last mile issue in terms of, cabling and access. So folks that could benefit maybe the most from being able to do, whether it's, telehealth or, that kind of thing, or even online shopping, right? I was thinking about that just, the other day. It's like, thank goodness for things like, Amazon, better for worse, right, where you can't just walk down the street and buy, diapers. So, you know, so libraries need to be, part of that mix. And again, IMLS is also, you're working with education in terms of making sure that rural, residents have that kind of access, because, and that's again, where your collaboration, how can you centralize, some of these different services, which also involve, literacy development, so that those folks can be part of the picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
And contribute.
Yeah. There is one question here. Dana Glassa asks, she said, I'm a new coordinator of literacy services. And we're just starting a literacy department from scratch. What are some things that you can do to assess needs, and make those connections? Anybody?
Read my book.
Dana, we've got a lot of good books here.
I was actually going to mention something just to connect that question along with the previous one, which is connect to the established communities.
Yes.
I think one of the things that we forget is the people to people person. We tend to, I think, especially in rural areas, think, well, what's available online. But I think to get to people, and really the heart of people, is where are they in your community?
Mhm.
Where are they going? What are they doing? Is it a cultural thing? Is it their church growing group? Is it the health services piece? What I really think we really need to also partner in many ways with health services, because they see literacy in a very different way. I also think, when you partner with cultural communities, you also see where issues of literacy exist, whether it's because, there is still sort of this mark about, if you're literate, it moves you up the chain within families.
Right.
And that comes with some psychological problems, along with, this different outreach within the actual families as well. So I think it really would behoove to look at the community, go to the local diners, sit
Yes.
with the people
Mhm.
who are really there. I think one of the reasons why the laundry
Informal
piece
survey.
is so exciting and so amazing is because it touches the community at its heart, right? Everybody wants to have their clothes clean. It's a sign of, where you are and, the comfort level. I know they're putting laundromats in schools so that the kids will come to schools, right? So
Yeah.
there's that. But I think when you go to places that are established in these ways to build on community, it gives you a chance to also see what it is that's culturally motivating or community motivating as well.
Yeah.
Right. I'm thinking if you find a way to survey, and you're not going to pass out those nice handwritten surveys, but you can sit at the diner for a couple days, different times of day, and initiate some conversation, and you can be doing your own anecdotal data and find out really what's important, or go to some churches and go part of that whatever coffee klatch after church and find out what people really are thinking and valuing, because we go in with our own perception. And, especially if you're not raised in that environment, you don't think about, okay, I'm on a big dairy farm and we can't ever really go away because you have a day-to-day
Yeah.
you have to do. So what can you do to help them if they really can't say, oh, I can't take a day and pack my kids off to the library? So, you'd find out things make you successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go to the Grange.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyday spaces. I think
Yeah.
it's really shocking to hear what people have to say about libraries when we're outside of the community of users we have, and not always in the most positive way either. So I think starting from everyday places, grocery stores, laundromats, auto repair clinics, nail salons, places where people are.
Shopping
Yeah.
malls.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. I have to. I'm going to close this up or finish this up. But at the same rate, let's see, Elizabeth and Ramon have offered to stay because I have to run. And I really hate the fact that I'm missing this. Is a great conversation. We could go on for another hour or so. But I do want to, I've enjoyed this conversation. You're right up my alley, and I'm taking notes, and you're all going to hear from me when I teach my class again in spring, because I got questions. But if you've enjoyed this discussion and you don't yet have a copy of Impactful Community, Community-Based Literacy Projects by Lesley Farmer. Remember to use, there's a promo code I will put here in the chat, ICBLP4, which will give you a 40% discount off, oops, it's 4, not a $, but that will give you 40% off the book. So go out and get that, and it's only on the website. Edi and Neal's book club next meets at 1 p.m. on Wednesday, November 20th, and they'll be discussing questions raised by Ryan Dowd's book, The Librarian's Guide to Homelessness, which I am not going to miss. Again, that fits into everything that it's talked about in my book. And he's been around for a long time, and I've read the book and want to know more. But you can go to alaeditions.org/book club to register for that program. I encourage everybody to do that. And many thanks to all of you, Elizabeth, Liz, Kat, of course, Dr. Farmer, and Dr. Abreu. I've really enjoyed it, and have a great afternoon. And I'm really sorry I had to run, but keep up the conversation, and I'll see you at a conference somewhere.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
So I think some of us are still here in case there's folks have, questions. I saw in the chat a piece about like social emotional learning and cultural, humility. Definitely that kind of echoes what Elizabeth was saying about being an active and, quite frankly, humble listener. And I think, Liz, you also gave that impression as well. If we're not part of the community, we should be. It's basically, what makes you proud to be in this community? Finding out what are the assets that are there. I think that's so important.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if anybody's been able to be successful at places like county fairs or those community events that people come to. What is there a way? I mean, I know a lot of libraries do here register for your library card, but that might not get you really excited if you can't read. And maybe if they learn more services. I was really impressed. The library branch right next to one of my elementary schools, you had so many people doing job applications. A lot of our new people in the community were that they could use email to contact their family in other countries. They saw it for so many different reasons. They came in and did, we had homeless who it was a safe place during the day. All those things are valuable. And how can we tap on, share some of these resources and things, right? So like beyond the book. So they come in because I want this service. I need this. And then maybe they'll find that they're more comfortable and be open to something else.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most obvious thing is storytelling.
Yeah.
And not just storytelling for kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
The community storytelling. And that's a really big picture, especially for First Nation
Yes.
Events. And then, they use that as a basis then to kind of like, for example, to have oral histories recorded.
Mm-hmm.
And then also put into a print thing, and then have a place where then those, like the library, or community center, then where those recordings and again, transcripts are kept for people to be able to access.
That's powerful.
It's been very powerful. It's some really fascinating things with the elders. I've also seen community fairs, which are, here's a really interesting one. Sports. And again, for some of the tribes within the United States geographically, area, when you talk about where do people come and where are people motivated, games, sports games. So, the idea of having, the printout of, the different, players, being able to, statistics, stats, keeping that kind of together. Again, getting the stories of like interviewing the different players and then having, a publication or a newsletter, any of that stuff. Again, where is language being practiced? And tie it with that. And I think the key, one of the keys is like, especially with a lot of cultures that are more oral based, is the idea that when it's just oral based, you have to be there pretty much. We're getting a little bit better in terms of your phones. You might be recording, but that's the deal. That's the key. Is like, how do we record information so that you don't have to be in the same space at the same time? And that's what libraries, that's our shtick, is recorded information. Yeah, whether it's a poster or a magazine or any of those kinds of reality, like a globe is basically a way to record information. So I think that is a real key for folks. It's like, so I can't be with the car repair guy all the time. So there's car manuals, but I have to be able to read those. So, it isn't like you have to have a book. When I taught English in Tunisia and Peace Corps, it was like, what kind of words, what kind of vocabulary do you need to learn? And one of the groups that I worked with was post office workers. And so I was able to I had worked in the post office when I was, in college. And so I had, some of those folks then send me postal forms. So, what was the vocabulary, like first class, the word media, COD, etc. So learning that vocabulary then was meaningful as a way. So you can start, if you can start with the specialty, and then you can kind of like, some of those words were in other venues as well. And again, recording that. So it isn't, again, just basically, so here's a form. It's recorded. This is a way that you can get information from one place to another, and you don't have to be there.
I guess if there aren't any more questions, we can wrap up today, and we'll hope to see all of you again, or more of you, on November 12th for our session on homelessness in libraries discussion. Thank you all for participating and for coming today.
Great sharing, folks.
Yes. So much great information. I'm very excited to go read about all of these things. I really want to read your Wonder World?
Wonder Libraries.
Yes.
Thanks,
I saw
Liz.
that.
Yeah.
I saw that listed somewhere last week, and I went, now that sounds very cool.
Well, that's Ramon and the, brilliant team at ALA who named it.
Yes, they are very good at that.
Yeah. I want to read all these books. Like you, my credit card is going to take a hit here.
Exactly. There it is. Wonder
There it
Library.
is. Yay.